I was in first grade when my teacher sent me home with a tiny seed in a paper cup. She promised that if we watered it, there would soon be a freshly green companion for our windowsills. But I couldn't stop digging it out of the soil. I wanted to watch it grow. I wanted to know for sure that it would. My grandmother, the green thumb, told me to have faith. She said that nothing is revealed quickly. But what did I know yet of trusting in things I couldn't see? And so it sat on the kitchen table, overwatered, its soil disturbed by my 6-year-old skepticism and impatience, and it refused to grow. Years have passed since then. And in that time, we've met Katrina and Sandy, and the Black Summer in Australia, which burned over 19 million hectares of land. Famine and flood are now routine, like memes, like morning coffee, like the rising price of food and fuel. And every time we've watched the fireworks in the early January sky, we've already broken the record for the hottest year in history. I was in 6th grade when I learned that seeds don't grow with just faith alone, that some need the cold of winter and then the soft kiss of spring. Others need socks or friends or fur to hitch a ride. Some need the sweet flesh of fruit and a stranger's willing hunger. Other seeds need fire to graze the land. Now in Gaza, Yemen, and South Sudan, there is fire and gunfire plenty. And the sounds of war are more familiar than birdsong, than babbling brooks or beating wings. My grandmother said that a garden needs more than just faith to survive. It needs tending. And she showed me how hope is a seed planted in darkness. How cynicism is a weed that, if left unchecked, will strangle the other plants. And she said to me, "Darling, a green thumb isn't something you're born with, but something that you learn." Still, airstrikes erase entire families from memory, and many souls are lost in the sea between Libya and Italy. And forests, our ancestral lungs, are burning for palm oil, sugarcane, and cattle ranching. It's been years now since my grandmother died of a broken heart. A different kind of drought took her, and I watched as denial and hatred made her flammable too. But we buried her in a garden with roses and sweet peas and marigolds and silent prayers for more green thumbs. Now, poetry is one of the many ways that I make sense of the world. And I think these kinds of creative practices are so essential, particularly in a world that is facing a polycrisis of interconnected global threats. From the generation of general AI, the potential for biowarfare, the climate disaster, the rising food and fuel prices, I could go on. But as I'm talking, I just want you to take a moment and notice, what were you feeling in your body as I was naming these things? The climate crisis, general AI, rising food and energy prices. What is it you're feeling in your body? Is it numbness maybe? Panic? Fear? Now, I know it's uncomfortable, but I want you to sit with that feeling for just a moment and ask yourself, what does that feeling make you want to do? run, hide. Maybe it makes you want to make a lot of money so you can buy a private island and save you and your friends. Or maybe, like in COVID, your instinct is to run to the nearest grocery store and buy up all the canned goods and toilet paper. I know for me, it makes me want to retreat into my world because that's where I feel safe, where I have control. And this is what panic does to our bodies. So, quick biology lesson. When our body perceives threat, one of the things that happens is adrenaline and cortisol flood our system. Now, these hormones are really great if you have a big presentation at work or you're doing a TEDx talk, but they're not so great when you need to make rational and logical decisions. When you have these hormones constantly flooding your body, we call this a hyper-aroused state. And one of the things it affects is your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain which is largely responsible for rational thinking, problem solving, and decision making. Now you can see how, in a moment of crisis, this would be a problem. In fact, when I was working on cruise ships, as part of the mandatory crew safety training, they taught us that the number one thing to avoid in crisis, above all else, is panic. Panic is what gets you killed. Now, there are some who would say that panic is very necessary considering the direness of our current crises. Back in 2019, the Swedish activist Greta Thunberg said, "I don't want you to be hopeful. I don't want your hope. I want you to panic. And then I want you to act. Act as if the house is on fire, because it is." Now, personally, I love Greta Thunberg, but I disagree with her on one small thing here. And that's that I think hope is absolutely essential to be effective. Now, when I talk about hope, I'm not talking about the passive feeling which arrives to us. I'm talking about something active, which we participate in creating. I'm going to get to that in a second. First, I want to paint a spectrum of hope. And I want you to think back to a recent conversation you maybe had with your friends, your family, maybe your colleagues, about the state of the world or the future. And I want you to see if you can identify yourself on this spectrum. Now, on the one extreme, we have cynicism. And this sounds like, well, nothing ever really changes. Or, that's just the way the world works. In this state, our thoughts and our feelings are shaped by this deep fear or doubt that positive change just simply isn't possible. Now, the Austrian psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, in his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he spoke about this as the existential vacuum. And he saw the need for hope as a life or death situation. He was imprisoned in Auschwitz during World War II. He spoke about the existential vacuum as a place where a person has lost all sense of purpose, meaning, and hope. Now, when this is in overdrive, it leads to inaction. It leads to apathy, right? We do need a healthy amount of skepticism. We need people who critique our ideas and make sure that our systems are robust and sustainable and equitable. But when it's in overdrive, we don't step forward. Now, this is on the one extreme. Let's go to the other. I call this blind optimism. This sounds like, well, everything works out in the end. I'm sure we've all been this at different points in our lives. I know I have. And I think to the untrained eye, this form of hope seems necessary, maybe even important. But this is the kind of hope that Romanian philosopher Emil Cioran called a slave's virtue. It's the kind of hope that leads to the passive acceptance of injustice. It's the denial of the very real challenges that we are facing in the world. And it too also leads to apathy and inaction. So hopefully, we want to reside somewhere in between these two. We need a healthy amount of criticality and skepticism, but we also need optimism that believes in the potential and the harmony of the future. And I call this hope as praxis. Praxis is a Greek word, and it describes the unity of both theory and practice. So the idea that things like philosophy and science should not just interpret the world, but actively take actions to change it. This is an informed hope, a wise hope that takes steps forward based on a thorough understanding of the situation, both its challenges and its opportunities. And I see this as an orientation towards life. Now, let me give you some examples. What does this look like? This looks like 24-year-old Yusuf Abu Rabi in Beit Lahaya, Palestine, who, with his family, gathered as many seeds as they could to create makeshift gardens in amongst the bombed-out buildings to help combat the famine that his community are currently facing. Tragically, Yusuf is no longer with us, but his acts of hope, his hope as praxis, lives on. But it doesn't have to be in just grand gestures like this. I'll give you an example from my own life. In April this year, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. And this came after 2 years of doctors being unable to tell me what was wrong, and I was navigating a haze of uncertainty. Since April, I've undergone 3 surgeries. I've battled a bout of sepsis, I adjusted to life with a stoma bag, and I'm currently in the midst of chemotherapy. Now, what didn't help me was people saying things like, stay strong, or have hope. Those phrases land kind of hollow when you're in excruciating pain. But what did help were acts of hope. And this looked like getting out of bed the day after surgery to move my body, even when everything in me was screaming to stay still. It looked like my friends and family rallying together to pool their resources to fund my surgeries, which I wouldn't have been able to do alone. Hope wasn't a passive feeling. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was an active decision that I made and that my community made. And we fed it step by step, bit by bit, by small actions that we took. Now, through these examples, we can pull out some key ingredients for praxis. The first is curiosity. And that's about having a willingness to question the narratives we've been told, to stay open to possibility. The second ingredient is imagination, the capacity to visualize new worlds, new experiences, new ways of being. The third is a community orientation. We are stronger when we work together, working as a collective for impact beyond just ourselves. The next is agency, a belief that our contributions can and do matter. And of course, the last one is daily action. And these are not just things like donating money. It's about daily actions that bolster dignity, equity, and compassion, not just for ourselves, but also for our planet. Now, I think these things are what make life extremely tolerable. They are far more difficult than cynicism or blind optimism. And for that reason, I believe they are far more spiritually fulfilling and intellectually compelling. So I'll leave you with one last poem. Indeed, this world is full of unfathomable things. Unfathomable like a father pleading for help while holding his headless child, while other fathers fund the bombs which cradle strangers' children in dust. Unfathomable like the 1,692 acres of fertile land that become desert every hour we breathe. Like the islands of garbage in the ocean, so big they're like nations lost at sea. And still, despite the screams to become hard and brittle, to protect myself against all that threatens my peace. In some distant room inside me, there is a string being plucked, a song that wants to live as if I were not besieged by fear. Indeed, this world is full of unfathomable things, like the sacred dance of bees, which tell their kin where to fly to find food, like the salmon whose generations remember the roots of ancient rivers without ever having been taught, like dragonflies which cross oceans, over 18,000 kilometers on such fragile wings. Indeed, this world is full of unfathomable things. Yesterday, I learned that a blue whale's arteries are big enough to crawl through. And still they would have us believe that magic is dead. But look, my skin heals itself. My thoughts can build worlds. Yes, we are all magicians here. And there is good work waiting for us. Work in the name of resilience and wonder. Work that asks us to fling ourselves into the unfathomable and acquire the taste for miraculous things. Yes, there is a skill we must learn. And that skill is hope.